Good morning and welcome to Rich Thoughts for Breakfast.
I'm Harold Herring, and that's my fine wife, Beth. On today's call, we're going to talk about 7 things about matrimony. Matrimony.
Matri-Money.
I heard one time a successful man can buy his wife everything she wants and pay cash for it. A successful woman is someone who knows where to find such a man.
I hear you. However,
I know. There are 7 things everyone should know about matrimony, including single people. Number 1, it's not her money, it's not your money, it's God's money. We can't begin to tell you the horror stories we've heard about some sinful slacker husband who runs up the debts and then bailed on his wife and children, leaving them to survive any way they can. I can tell you story after story about families losing homes, mothers working 2 and 3 jobs, children placed in peril because of the debt left behind during a divorce. But the first key to marital and financial bliss is to recognize it's not your money, it's God's money.
that's true. Number 2, what he or she doesn't know won't hurt them is a matrimony myth. Listen, there need to be no money secrets in marriage, and that's just the truth. We can't begin to tell you the number of people over years who told us they had no idea how much debt their spouse had before they got married. And we're talking about serious money. Can you imagine finding out after you just married somebody that their spouse is $40,000 in a credit card debt or more? Or how it feels to have a process server show up at the front door with 3 judgments for defaulting on loans they'd had. If you think or say that your spouse doesn't need to know everything you spend, well, that's a prescription for DIVORCE. Really, financial infidelity is going to be exposed, always will come to the surface somewhere. You may get by with it for a while, but it's going to come into the light of day, and then there's going to have to be a reckoning.
That's true. Number 3, there are things that you just gotta have is a matrimony myth.
That's it.
We live in an age of unrealistic expectations. You see the results by the number of people in debt all around you. You don't have to have matching new cars, the nicest furniture, and all the latest electronic toys. Make a pact that you'll never go into debt for stuff. Ask yourselves, do you really need it? Will a less expensive model do the same thing? Do you need all the bells and whistles?
Number 4, another matrimony myth. We can afford the payment. This logic is the kind that's gotten people into financial 911s quicker than anybody can say you've lost that lovin' feeling. And here's the bottom line. If you can't pay off the credit card balance in full at the end of the month, or the mortgage payment, or the insurance, or the taxes, or, that represent 30% of all your net income, don't sign on that dotted line. Just because you can get the credit doesn't mean you need to use that credit. You just can't believe what we've seen doing seminars around the country. But let us point out that the doubling your income does not cut your expenses in half. Parkinson's law says that expenses will always rise to meet income. So you really need to have a family financial plan, or you could see those expenses rising faster than a speeding bullet, really. And it isn't Superman's bullet or whatever they say.
Yeah.
Our advice is to live off the one income and save or invest the rest. That is you just can't believe how great that works. This approach will ensure that you're not snagged into trouble by changing economic climates. And believe me, they change sometimes faster than the weather.
Number 5, we've got plenty of time to start saving money and investing for the future. That's another matrimony myth. Years ago, we came across an illustration that we use more because it proves the benefit of saving of beginning your savings early. Using an example of twins, Lori and Larry graduated from college at the age of 22. Lori decided she'd better start saving for the future. So for the next 8 years, she put away $2,000 a year. After 8 years, she quits saving, but leaves the money in an account. Larry has not invested at all, but decides 10 years later, at age 32, that he'd better get a plan. He then begins investing $2,000 a year until he retires at age 65, some 33 years later. If Larry and Lori had a consistent 8% return on their money, at age 65, they would both have $347,000. That's the benefit of compound interest.
Now, Lori started out at 22 and did 10 years. Larry waits 10 years and does 2,000 for the next 33 years.
She did 8 years, not 10.
Excuse me, 8, yeah, 8 years. He starts 10 years later and does it for 33 years, and they both end up with the same amount of money. Since we're speaking this, I want to be sure you're not seeing it in writing. Do you understand the implications of starting early? Number 6, we're too deeply in debt to get out of this mess is another matrimony myth. We have never talked to anyone, counseled anyone, and showed anyone that could not become debt-free in 7 years or less. That is, if the husband and the wife, who are spiritually speaking, are one flash meeting, they decide to do it together. That's when things can really turn around a whole lot quicker. Open communication about money, no matter how painful it is at the moment, is the best prescription for a long, financially secure marriage, the way God truly intended it to be.
That's good. Number 7. 7 dreaded D's of debt. First, divorce. We can't begin to tell you the horror stories we've heard about, as I said earlier, about slacker husbands running up debts and then leaving. We could tell you the story after story about families losing homes, and we mentioned this earlier, but I mention it again because it's something we hear and read about a lot from families. Second, disability. Many hardworking people get in debt or back in debt simply because they were injured or unable to work. Rarely do disability income benefits cover the salary of the injured person or the additional medical expenses involved during a recuperative period. Sadly, many folks don't have medical insurance, so the problem is intensified. This is particularly true of self-employed people who are injured while working on the job. Simply put, if they don't work, they don't get paid, which means bills go unpaid while the family is trying to survive. When the family desperately needs income, they often turn to credit cards until they're maxed out, always believing things will turn around tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes.
That's it. Third could be disease. Sometimes a disease strikes an employed or a self-employed member of the family, and it creates a multitude of problems. First, if the family member who is stricken is either employed or self-employed, they're going to face that, like Harold just mentioned, loss of income. Second, if the disease happens to be debilitating, the person facing the disease will often need ongoing medical assistance. Many medical plans have a ceiling and length of, how much they can get and to what date. And even getting on disability is a long and arduous, trip.
Process. It really is.
It really is, that process. This will necessitate either paying someone or for the necessary care or an added expense to the family, or somebody else quitting a job to take care of this person. And it just, either way, it costs money. Finally, even if a person has good medical insurance, there are still lots of copays for doctor visits and often extensive prescription drugs. So if the person whose health has been compromised is a primary breadwinner, that creates a financial burden on the family. We know a lot of godly folks whose financial future was decimated by disease.
Fourth, death. It is not negative or fatalistic thinking on behalf of a married woman to think of the consequences she and her family may face in the event of divorce or death, and take precautions to protect the family. We recommend that every woman and man, for that matter, begin educating themselves on finances if they haven't already. We consider it an absolutely necessary that every person have a plan to get out of debt. Sadly, some women never learn about financial matters because their husband doesn't want them to know about the money and debt. If you're married to one of those men who won't share finances with you, then learn on your own. I want to be clear here. We do. For a woman to not educate herself about finances because of her husband's attitude is just an excuse, and sadly, one day it may come back and you would regret that decision. So don't assume that the man's smarter than you are when it comes to financial matters. After all, he had the good sense to marry you.
Amen. Fifth, disaster. Wow. You know, you only have to read about these things, and you might have been fortunate to read about them in other areas: hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, fires. I mean, all kinds of things that cause incredibly difficult economic times for
many people. And in the last 2 years, there's been pandemics.
Yep. And
COVID-19.
I mean, look at the things and how life has changed, like my husband said, just within the last 2 years. And really, many times people just on their homes and other things just only cover the minimum of loss. And sometimes even with flooding, you can't even get a good, it costs you a whole lot more if you're living in a flood zone. So the point of it is, there are some things that the catastrophic circumstances that insurance company refers to as acts of God. But the point is, how are you keeping your finances to cover things that happen catastrophically?
Absolutely. 6, dismiss from the job. Never spend money you don't have today based on money you think you're going to get tomorrow. Today's economy, or in any economy, never make spending decisions based on what's happened in the past or what you've been promised will happen in the future.
7th, shall I say it? Dumb decisions. That's dumb decisions. Without question, probably the biggest culprit in leading unsuspecting believers into bondage of debt is a dumb decision. In fact, debt could actually be defined as dumb excuse for buying things. Watch out. Dumb excuse for buying things. The point is, don't buy stuff on a credit card. If you can't pay the bill off by the due date. Now, there have been times in life where we have bought stuff, put the money in the bank. And then when it was through, I always sent those things. Of course, that was back in the day of post office, a month in advance to make sure it got paid off. Point, though, just watch your money.
Absolutely.
If you've been blessed by today's program,
or by the ministry, go to haroldherring.com, click the button that says sow a seed. Just ask God what to say. And until tomorrow morning at 8:30 Eastern, God bless you. Happy trails.
And keep thinking rich thoughts from the Word of God.
And think on these things.
Yes.